I recently moved into my dorm room starting as a sophomore in college, and a friend of mine gave me his old N64 to play. I was stoked, to say the least. I could finally play all of those old games of my youth that I hadn't touched in at least a decade. His Nintendo 64 came with one yellow controller and a rather shoddy copy of Super Smash Bros. And while beggars can't be choosers, needless to say, it didn't take long until I became bored of beating up all level 9 CPUs. That weekend I decided to drive around a few neighborhoods around 20 minutes or so off campus, hitting up the local garage sales, hoping to score on some good deals from ignorant parents. I ended up picking up a copy of Pokemon Stadium, GoldenEye, F-Zero, and 2 other controllers for $2. Satisfied, I began to drive out of the neighborhood when one last house caught my attention. I still have no idea why it did. There were no cars there, and only one table was set up with random junk on it. But something sort of drew me there. I usually trust my gut on these things, so I got out of the car and was greeted by an old man. His outward appearance was, for some lack of a better word, displeasing. It was odd, if you asked me, to tell you why I thought he was displeasing. I couldn't really pinpoint anything. There was just something about him that put me on edge. I can't explain it. All I can tell you is that if it wasn't in the middle of the afternoon and there were other people within shouting distance, I would not have even thought of approaching this man. He flashed a crooked smile at me and asked what I was looking for. And immediately, I noticed that he must be blind in one of his eyes. His right eye had that glazed look about it. I forced myself to look to his left eye instead, trying not to offend, and asked him if he had any old video games. I was already wondering how I could politely excuse myself from the situation when he would tell me that he had no idea what a video game was. But to my surprise, he said that he had a few old ones in his box. He assured me he'd be back in a jiffy, and turned to head back into the garage. As I watched him hobble away, I couldn't help but notice that what he was selling on his table. Littered across his table were rather peculiar paintings, so to speak. Various artworks that looked like ink blots that a psychiatrist might show you. Curious, I looked through them. It was obvious that why no one was visiting this guy's garage sale. They weren't exactly aesthetically pleasing. As I came to the last one, for some reason, it looked almost like Majora's Mask. The same heart-shaped body with little specks protruding outward. Initially, I just thought that since I was secretly hoping to find that game at these garage sales, some Freudian bullshit was projecting itself into the ink blots. But given the events that happened afterward, I'm not so sure now. I could have asked the old man about it. I wish I would have asked the old man about it. After staring at the Majora-shaped blot, I looked up at the old man who was suddenly there again, arm's length in front of me, smiling at me. I admit, I jumped out of reflex and laughed nervously as he handed me a Nintendo 64 cartridge. It was the standard gray color, except that someone had written Majora on it in black permanent marker. I got butterflies in my stomach as I realized what a coincidence this was, and asked him how much he wanted for it. The old man smiled at me and told me that I could have it for free. That it used to belong to a kid who was about my age, that didn't live here anymore. There was something weird about how the man phrased that, but I didn't really pay attention to them. I was too caught up in not only finding this game, but getting it for free. I reminded myself to be a bit skeptical since this was a pretty shady cartridge, and there's no guarantee it would work. But then there was an optimist side of me that interjected that maybe this was some kind of beta version or pirated version of the game. And that was all I needed to be back on Cloud 9. I thanked the old man, and he smiled at me and wished me well, saying goodbye then. Well, at least that's what it sounded like to me. All the way in the car ride home, I had a nagging doubt that the man had said something else. My fears were confirmed when I booted up the game. To my surprise, it worked just fine, but there was one save file named simply Ben. Goodbye, Ben, he was saying. Goodbye, Ben. I felt bad for the man, obviously a grandparent and obviously going senile, and I, for some reason or another, reminded him of his grandson, Ben.